Hello, ladies and gentlemen. This is Steve once again, and I'd like to do really a second part on my Technics TR 979 deck. In the first one, I showed you some of the features that it has, and then, of course, I had the back off so you could view some of the electronics. I'd like to go ahead and show you this thing while it's working, and I have two tapes here. The first one is just a standard formulation, and it's the Maxell UR, which were produced up until, I don't know, a decade ago, and they're still pretty plentiful. The other ones, I know everybody's going to laugh, is the Radio Shack HC. This is more of a chromium dioxide tape or Type 2 tape. But as I'd said before, this thing features ATC, which is basically the auto biasing, auto tape level adjustment, or, you know, automatic tape calibration. I guess that's technically what you would call it. And so say you want to just bias a tape. You don't want to have to fiddle with the bias adjustment yourself. So you would set this thing right in the middle and then set the tape levels about where you want them. Make sure that you turn on the Dolby, you know, if you want it on. So say you just want to record with Dolby B, you would turn that on, and then you'd press, and here I'll just reset the counter here, you would press the ATC. And I'll show it to you here as it works. So it fast forwards the tape, records a tone onto it, and then after doing that, it'll rewind the tape, listen to that tone, and then make the adjustment. That's not a perfect way of doing it. Obviously, if this was a 3-head cassette deck, it could go or make the adjustment in a more accurate fashion. But that's the bias adjustment, and then it'll do the EQ adjustment, record some tones here, and then adjust the EQ, and then it does the level adjustment. That's primarily for the Dolby, and then of course it records that tone or series of tones, rewinds, and then listens for that level, and then makes the adjustment. So this whole thing takes what, maybe 20-30 seconds, and it's done, and then it rewinds it right back to where you were. So that's a Type 1 tape. The second deck here, which has the same features, this is a Type 2 tape, and I'll just go ahead and do the adjustment on it, the ATC adjustment. And I have Dolby B activated for both of these on the record. So it'll bias and EQ for Dolby B. So now it's making the bias adjustment, and it rewinds. And again, this thing works good. It really does. There are some tape formulations, older tape formulations, crappy tape formulations, where this thing will not bias and EQ the tape. And if that's the case, when you hit the ATC, it'll flash and basically tell you, no, this can't be biased. But most modern tapes, this thing doesn't have any problem adjusting for them. So you can see this is just about done. Now again, I don't know, what, 30 seconds maybe it takes. It's not very long, and these things are done. So now it's all done, and it rewinds it, puts it back where it started. So I have a Type 1 tape in one of the decks, Type 2 tape in the other decks, in the other deck, and both of them are more or less biased and EQ'd and level set for proper calibration with Dolby B. Keep in mind, before I had told you that, yeah, this has, you know, HX Pro. I know it's written on the bottoms as well, obviously. But some of the benefits of HX Pro are undone by the fact that this does not have discrete circuitry for the playback and record amplifiers, and also it's undone by the fact that the heads in this thing are not amorphous heads. You can see the playback head, and I'll just kind of point to it, and then the record head right beside it. One is permalloy or permalloy, however you pronounce that. The other one's a ferric head. But it would have been better, and obviously this would have raised the cost if they had put in discrete circuitry in this thing and then also put amorphous type heads in this. And then that would really more or less give you the full benefits, at least for a 2-head deck, of what Dolby HX Pro offers. So some of the benefits of HX Pro are undone, right? It's a high frequency headroom extension system because it continuously varies the bias. Some of that is undone by the fact that this thing does not have the greatest playback and record circuitry and the greatest heads. So there you have it. The Harman Kardons, on the other hand, like my 262 2-head deck, does. It has discrete circuitry and an amorphous record playback combo head in it. So it gets noticeably better frequency response at the high end if you have high level percussion going through it. And that's really, again, why the Dolby HX Pro more or less was developed. Now, obviously, all of this is undone by modern digital recording DAT decks, which of course are old now, but just, you know, providing you have a decent sound card in your computer, a sound blaster or beyond, you can do recordings that'll blow this thing away. You can do 24-bit recordings with a frequency response depending on where you set your sampling frequency, all the way up to 50,000 hertz, which would be the limit really of commercial grade reel-to-reel decks of the 1970s and 80s. And then of course the headroom on you know, at a 20 or on a 24-bit recorder is going to be somewhere around 140 decibels. Probably the electronics on most computers couldn't produce that anyway, but you get the point that I'm making here. For nostalgia and things like that, and if you're just a cassette deck buff, then you know, these are great decks to have. I am going to probably get around to replacing the belts on this thing. Again, this is one of those kamikaze decks where you have to unsolder things in order to get to some of the innards. The belts still appear to be good, though. It plays just fine, but I know that would probably be a good thing for me to do. Another thing I didn't mention, obviously, is that this has ultra-fast rewind or turbo rewind and ultra-fast fast forward or turbo fast forward. That's another feature this thing has. And then when the tape begins to approach either the end or the beginning, it'll slow it down so it doesn't hurt your tape in the ultra-fast speeds. Also, and it should be obvious, these are two-motor cassette decks. So one for, I don't know, fast forward, rewind, all of that, and then the other for the Capistan drive system. So dual motor with ultra-fast forward and rewind, and of course the TPS system, the tape search system, and that's actually a pretty helpful thing to have. And then of course, as I said before, you know, sync start if you want to duplicate your tapes, and then you can either dupe them 1-to-1 or double speed, which would be what, 3 3/4. So 1 7/8 to 3 3/4. So that's about it. Just a few extra little things that I wanted to talk about. Really not a bad deck. If you're an audiophile kind of person, this probably wouldn't be the deck for you. But if you're the average Joe and just want a good, dependable, good sounding deck with just a slew of features, then this is probably the one you would want to get if you can find one. These are really hard to find. The Technics RS TR 979 from about the mid-90s. You know, the "Hi, I'm Bill Clinton, your president, I feel your pain." God bless you, folks. Check out my other site, A Father's Devotions. I have a link for it here. This is Steve for My Audio Stuff.